Hey guys, and welcome on into the next NHL season preview show. And today we are going to be talking about the Minnesota Wild, of course, the team I'm most excited to talk about for this upcoming season. And to do that with me, I brought two very knowledgeable Wild fans that know the team like myself, like the back of my hand. Seth, welcome on in. Introduce yourself to the viewers. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
What's happening, everybody? This is Seth Toupal, your host of Locked on Wild. For those that aren't aware, Locked on Wild is a daily 30-minute show covering the Minnesota Wild. We do episodes every Monday through Friday. And as we get into the season, going to be ramping up with some pre and post game stuff, as well as coverage throughout the week. So happy to be here. And if you haven't already, make sure to head over to Lockdown Wild and hit that subscribe button and tune in.
Awesome. Brett, welcome on the show and give people a little bit of information about you.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Brett Marshall at @B_Marsh92 on Twitter. Probably best known for the one posting all the player cards and stats after most Wild games. Got a little dicey there toward the back half of last season with like posting it like 3 at a time. Hopefully I'll be more on top of that this year. Not quite as busy of a winter, hopefully. And then I will also be joining the crew over at the Soda Pod for this upcoming season and likely beyond as one of their main hosts for their Wild Focus show, along with Isha. So I don't know exactly what our plan is yet. We're still kind of ironing all that out, but should be some weekly appearances for me over there talking Wild. We'll be talking some analytics as kind of my niche on that as well. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
All right, perfect. Both guys' Twitter links are on the screen, and both will be in the description below. So nice and easy to go and give them a follow. We're going to jump right into the show. We're going to start with the first segment. I'll go first for this one. Of course, some teams they have big lists when it comes to additions and subtractions. The Wild, not one of those teams. Pretty small list here, but I think we all kind of expected that to go this way. Start with subtractions first. Vinny Lettieri, a nice depth guy, but not somebody that you're really going to miss out of the lineup. Didn't really have a long-term future here. So I'm not really sad to see him go, but I'm not really happy to see him go either. Goligoski, that's an addition by subtraction. Goligoski's great. Thanks for your time here. Obviously, a Minnesota kid, but it's time to move on. It's time to move on from Goligoski. Mermis, again, a depth piece, depth guy. He played pretty well when he was in the lineup, so no complaints. But again, not a long-term piece here. Jacob Lauko came over in a trade from Boston with Vinny Lettieri. Honestly, not really hoping to see that much of Lauko. There's some other guys that I prefer to see in the lineup, but we'll have to see how that goes. And then Yakov Trenin signed to, I believe, a 4-year deal. Play most likely on the third or fourth line. We'll obviously have to see where he fits. But another one of those guys with grit does have some offensive ability, so we'll see how he does. But overall, a boring offseason when it comes to additions and subtractions for the Wild. Brett, we'll go to you second this one. Additions, subtractions. What do you think about the moves in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what we expected. A team that's pretty strung on cap space. Not really in a position to make a big splash. I think some other additions, quote unquote, that you could include here would be hopefully big jumps from guys like Liam Ogren, Marat Husadinov, some of those rookie skaters. Potentially could throw Jesper Wallstedt into that mix. So I mean, that's kind of where they're I think are looking internally. They're looking to get some guys to be better. I don't know much about Lauko, but I liked the trade when it happened because what the Wild were missing, with all their injuries last year, was kind of that more physical presence, I think, in their bottom six. I think Lettieri is a fine tweener. Lucchini, same thing, kind of a fine tweener. Mason Shaw is a good energy guy, but they lack kind of that physicality, that hard to play against identity that they covet, and which to me, as much as I criticize that, I think it's still important to have some of that in your bottom six, more importantly on your fourth line. So I think when you can send out a guy that didn't fit your fourth line for a guy that probably more better fits your fourth line, and whether that's where he starts or if he's the 13th forward or wherever, I think, I liked that move, subtle one. I don't think, it's game breaking by any means, but I think it adds some stability in a spot that saw a lot of volatility last year. Trennan, I thought, was a bit of an overpay, but he's a guy that plays a good defensive game. He has some of that meanness to him. And I think a guy that you could probably put either, like you said, either on your third or fourth line. Hopefully will be a good piece for them there. Maybe a guy that's not going to be as offensive, but again, another guy that's going to add some stability, identity back to that bottom six. As far as the subtractions, I don't have a whole lot to add outside of, for up to me, I would have maybe liked to keep Dakota Mermis as the 7th D. I don't even know if there's an injury. I still don't even know if John Merrill, despite being the 7th D, will even be the first call, if they might, opt for like a Damon Hunt in that situation instead. But Mermis earned the right to go test free agency, I think, based on what he did last year. So, nothing game breaking here by any means, kind of what we expected, and a lot of depth guys in, a lot of depth guys out. So nothing too crazy.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully next year we have some more excitement here in the off season. Seth, what do you think here, additions and subtractions?
Well, Bill Guerin identified 2 areas that really needed improvement this offseason. That was the identity of the team, and the team needed some help on special teams as well. And Yakov Trenin does check both of those boxes. I do agree that it's probably a little bit of an overpay to get him to come here, and I question the need for a player like that, considering you have guys on the roster that are supposed to do the exact same thing. But at the end of the day, he, I think, brings a really physical and intense presence that just was not on the roster this past season. And so if he is able to fill that in either a third or a fourth line role, that has huge value for this Minnesota Wild team. And I mean, the penalty kill was like 3rd worst in the league last season. So obviously having some new bodies on that unit is appealing as well, to try to just make it so that it's better than 72% for the course of the season. So you look at what the fourth line did, Vinny Lettieri being part of that, and those guys skated hard. And so I'm not going to ever criticize players like Vinny Lettieri or Jacob Lucchini for that. They skated hard and they played hard. It's just you look at some of the things that let this Wild team down at the end of the season last year, when Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Boldy was the top line. There just was not secondary scoring from any line on the roster beyond that top line. And so Bill Guerin went out, tried to grab a couple of pieces. Jacob Lauko is kind of a depth guy, but he's young. He's 24. He skates pretty well. He's got some speed to his game, and he hits everything that moves. Sounds a little bit like Brandon Duhaime in that aspect. And so I like the fact that they kind of took a chance on a younger guy that they can maybe throw in the wings as a depth forward for the next couple of seasons. But, like you said, Alex Goligoski, just the last couple of seasons here didn't go great, but he was getting up there in age, and it just got to the point where it was time to move on. Dakota Mermis earned an opportunity elsewhere with as much as he was asked to play this past season. And so while it was a quiet offseason for the Minnesota Wild, one that we expected to be quiet, it was nice to see some new bodies brought in to try to kind of shake things up a little bit. But, at the end of the day, secondary scoring is still a major need for this team. And so while Bill Guerin did address identity and special teams, it's going to be interesting to see how that secondary scoring shakes out this year.
Yeah, one thing I'm curious about too is because, we heard rumblings that they might try to add someone in the top 6, whether it was Perron. We heard Laine kicked around for a while, and whether it was money or maybe there's just a growing belief that maybe someone like a Liam Ogren is the fit for that role. And they, for once in their life, actually wanted to leave a spot open for the potential of a young player actually being able to contribute. I think it's also like we as Wild fans have been spoiled with how good players like Kaprizov, Boldy, and Faber were out of the gate. And I think like it's important at times to remember that, these young guys aren't always going to hit, in the first 20 games. We saw a little bit with Rossi, right? In his first stint, wasn't quite ready, went back down, came back strong. So, I think that, but I do think that's a testament to some belief that they have in some of these young players, or in the bounce backs of guys like Johansson or Hartman to get back to, 40-point, 20-goal guys that, we've seen it from Hartman, maybe not so much from Johansson, but I think, one of those three between Johansson, Hartman, Ogren, they're really hoping for kind of that big step. And I think that's part of, in addition to the money issue, I think that's another reason why they haven't seemed to be too aggressively trying to pursue filling that hole on presumably the second line.
We did hear a lot of rumors about Patrick Laine. And I was kind of worried that I was going to be doing this show and having Patrick Laine in the addition section, but having Marco Rossi in the subtraction section. And that would have made for a much more sour additions and subtractions segment, because I was one of those guys that was tweeting, "Don't trade Coyle," hashtag "Don't trade Coyle" back in the day when he was young and they were thinking about trading him. Obviously, that turned out how it did. But Marco Rossi, I don't want him traded at all. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I think he's somebody that you need to keep around. That's my thoughts.
I very much agree with that. And, I know what the logic is as to why people were on board with moving him, is because if you put a team together, Joel Eriksson Ek maybe isn't your prototypical 1C. And so then if you get a 1C and you slide Joel Eriksson Ek to your second line center, are you really going to have Marco Rossi as your third line center?
I think a team that's forced to have Marco Rossi as their 3C is a playoff team, but that's just me.
See, that's my thought process too. Is it's like I don't think there's a problem with slotting a guy in that spot in the lineup. I think Rossi would do fine there, but it comes down to the size. People are like, well, he's not 6'5", so he just isn't somebody that's ever going to turn into a 6'5" center. So let's go find one. And in episodes of Locked On Wild where we talked about Patrick Laine, the things that really concerned me were just health. He's missed a lot of games over his career. And I don't even necessarily go to the locker room stuff that was reported quite extensively, but it's that, and it's just the fact that you're getting like a true one-trick pony. Now, offense is a pretty good trick, but he doesn't bring you really any value on the defensive side of the ice either. And this is a Minnesota Wild roster that really prides themselves on having guys that can do both. So how do you hide him in that situation? Like those are the big things that led me to saying, I just don't think it's going to work. In addition to the thing that Montreal did to get him, which was taking on the entire contract, which was a huge no for the Minnesota Wild. So I'm glad Rossi is still here. And I think Brett's 100% right, is that this is looking more and more like the Wild are hoping that one of those young players rises to the occasion to step into a top six role. And if they do, this Wild team, I think, is going to look a lot more interesting than things currently look. But again, they're not far off. They're not far off from being a team that I think everybody would like to see. They're just a couple of roster moves that once those happen, then that's when the good stuff starts.
I totally agree. So we're talking about trading Marco Rossi, and now that's a perfect segue here into the next segment, upcoming free agents. So after this season, these guys are all either unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents. Marc-Andre Fleury has already announced that he will be retiring after the season, so I have him as RET there. And Brett, we'll start with you first this time. Upcoming free agents, who would you like to see the Wild re-sign of these guys? Who do you think that they could probably let go and that would be fine? What are your thoughts here?
I think Johansson and Merrill will be gone pretty much 100% guaranteed. I wouldn't even be surprised if they're gone before the end of the season somehow. If they can, they could be guys that maybe their deadline for a cheap, future considerations type deal, even potentially there. I think Kuznetsov will be back regardless. Rossi to me just feels like a prime candidate for like a 2-year bridge deal of some kind. I don't think he's going to get the big Boldy or Faber extension. But I think they're also at a point where this is a team that's never had a lot of centers, and with Yurov coming in with the high expectations for Riley Height, like both of those guys still haven't played an NHL game. They haven't proved that they're NHL players. Marco Rossi has. So I don't see the rush to usher him out of here. And then all of a sudden, God forbid for some reason, someone, Yurov or Height gets a serious injury or something happens where all of a sudden now they don't pan out in the way you hoped. Now you're back to, Joel Eriksson Ekin, who is your centers, right? You have nothing left, right? Where you had an asset. So, and I think as they continue to play, as he continues to play, I think his value continues to slowly rise. I think there's, the fact that he was shopping around means there's teams interested, but I don't see the rush on it. But I think he's like a perfect candidate for a 2-year bridge deal to either one, see if there's, still an even higher ceiling there than really good middle six center. Is it a top six? Is it top line even potentially? And also again to buy time for the, one of or both of Height and Yurov just to see where they fit into the mix. Lauko I could see coming back potentially. Just depends on kind of the role he does or doesn't carve out for himself. They didn't invest a ton to get him, so I'd imagine he won't be extremely expensive. Wallstead will be no-brainer extension. The one I'm curious to see what happens with is Chisholm, and I think what happens with Chisholm either pre-deadline or in the summer will tell you exactly what they think in terms of how ready or not ready that Ziv Buium is. Because I think that's the obvious spot to slot him in with 5 defensemen currently under contract next year. If Buium is going to play, he needs a spot. So that spot's either going to him or it might be maybe another 1-year deal for Chisholm potentially. So that's kind of the one I'm watching carefully to see what happens there. Obviously, I think the big thing for him too is if he establishes himself as a good power play guy, do they find a way to maybe hold on to him and meander things around on the blue line potentially? But I think he's kind of the indicator of where they think Buium will be coming into next season, depending on what they choose to do with him.
Perfect. Seth, what are your thoughts here, upcoming free agents?
I'm going to go in reverse order here because, we just saw the deal given to Yaroslav Askarov after being traded to the San Jose Sharks. Jesper's camp, I think, has taken a pretty keen look at that as kind of a starting point for Jesper's next deal. And I think it's 100% going to be, he'll sign regardless, whether it be, a shorter term deal. I think it is going to be a shorter term deal because we haven't really seen him a ton at the NHL level yet. And unless there's a big injury to Fleury or Gustafsson this season, we're probably not going to see a ton of him this year either. So both sides are going to work on something, to kind of meet in the middle for maybe a 2 or a 3-year deal so that he can get a little bit of time at the NHL level. And then that's when you could see a big deal come after that. I like what Brett mentioned about Declan Chisholm, and I'll kind of throw off of that as well, is that Chisholm is probably the guy, depending on if there are injuries in the lineup above him, I think he stands to be one that would slot in higher in the lineup more than, say, Zach Bogosian. So we're going to get an opportunity to see him play in a bunch of different spots in the lineup, which could lead to him performing better, or could show you that maybe he's not somebody that is more than like a 5th or a 6th or a 7th defenseman on a playoff team. So I think he probably is maybe another 1-year deal, depending on how this year goes. If not, then as was mentioned, you'll just look for Zeev to fill that spot on the roster come next year. Jacob Lauko is going to be, that'll probably be a 1-year deal if things go well for him this year. But as we'll talk about, there is a pretty crowded roster in front of him this upcoming season. And so if he can fight his way into it and put some good stuff on film, then maybe he ends up being a guy that they sign to more than just like a 1 year come back and let's try it again type of a deal. I see a bridge for Rossi, and on the Huznadinov front, that they're going to re-sign him too. He's a player that I think they expect will have a bright future, and so
I could see him getting, I think it was Nashville, like a while back, like 5-6 years ago. I think it was Colton Sissons. They gave him like a 7-year, like 2.2 million. It was some like really long contract with like a really like small dollar amount. I could see Huzadinov getting something like that, where it's like, hey, let's just lock down this bottom six guy for a while for like a couple million and just see if it works out.
the
I could see
Freddie
some.
Faceoffs are important.
Yeah. So like, I could maybe see something like that happening. Again, I do think there could be a potential bridge situation there too, where if he believes maybe there's a higher opportunity for him somewhere else and he kind of wants to prove it a little bit. So I think he's a player that could maybe go both ways.
Just don't be wary of St. Louis potentially throwing some offer sheets out now that that's just their thing, I guess. Yeah. They're just gonna try to offer sheet everybody that they can. But I'm not going to talk about my two favorite players on this list because I talk about them a lot on Locked On Wild, and so I'm going to give them the night off. But I don't think the top forward listed or the top defenseman listed, I don't think there's any way that they come back past their current deals. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if in Johansson's case, if the Wild are out of it by the trade deadline, it wouldn't shock me at all if he ends up somewhere else on a playoff team to try
someone will take a shot. Like I said, even if you're ditching him for future considerations, like who cares?
It's a $2 million contract.
Yeah.
Team, if the Wild retain even 50% of that, like I don't care what you get back in return. The big thing there is just the roster spot.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the three of us are just pushing Marcus Johansson right out the door. It's like, see ya.
I'll help him pack his bags. I don't care.
Yeah. Do it right now.
And, there are a lot of people, a lot of Wild fans, me and Seth were talking about this before the show, that are not big Bill Guerin fans. And I can say, while I am on I trust Bill Guerin side, if for some reason Marcus Johansson is re-signed, that changes drastically, my opinion with Bill Guerin. So, and Johansson could have a great year this year, and that's fine. He's a UFA. I'm sure he is going to put in the effort.
Let someone else pay for the outlier.
Yeah, he will show up for a game and he'll look amazing, and it's like, holy shit, who is this guy? And then you won't see him for 3 weeks. So
I will say the hidden, I don't know, talent's not the right word, but if you've read it all or listened into, I think it might have been on Fellowship of the Rink with Joe Smith and State of Hockey when they had Ogren on. Ogren actually, like, Johansson's like a pretty big mentor for Ogren, has been like from his time training in Sweden. I think his dad's his dad works directly with Johansson, and like he's always kind of been one of Ogren's favorite players. So I think like if there's one like positive of having Marcus Johansson still on the team, I think that's it. Is he's there as a mentor for one of your prospects you're really excited for. And I think anytime there's some sort of veteran presence that can make a young player feel comfortable, can show them the ropes, can give them that feedback, I think that's really important. I think oftentimes can go overlooked. So I will say that's maybe like the one saving grace he has right now.
He can do that from the press box.
He could.
Yes, he can, and it would be great to the trade deadline, and then he can go. Kusadinov, RFA, unless we see St. Louis do it. No, I'm just kidding. He should be fine. I don't really see any teams running out to sign him. I don't know if he's very well known in the NHL, so I don't really expect a lot.
He's under 6 foot, so only probably 10 GMs have ever heard of him.
Exactly. Marco Rossi, I would be signing him. Bill Guerin has shown that he's not afraid to give out the 8-year deal. And we've already seen with Matt Boldy how that's probably going to be very, very good long term. So, as I said, I trust Bill Guerin. If he wants to go long term with Rossi, I'd be fine with that. If you're going to go 2 to 3 years, well, then most likely he's going to be getting a much higher cap hit after that. So, there's pros and cons to each way, but I would be keeping Rossi around. Just everyone has to remember, and I know a lot of people bring it up, but the whole COVID situation and him getting sick, that really like took him a whole year back. So he's a whole year behind everyone else, and not just that, but that really affects your body. Like that really affects you. So I'm not ready to get rid of Rossi like some people are. Defenseman John Merrill, that's somebody I am ready to get rid of. See you later. There's young defensemen in Iowa that I would much rather see come up in case of an injury. So John Merrill, it's been fun, but see you later. Chisholm, I completely agree with both of you guys. This year will kind of depend what happens with him. Um, with the way the Wild look here and the amount of defensemen they've drafted the last few years, I wouldn't be looking to do anything long term with Declan. Um, he may have a good season this year, but still, I wouldn't really look at long term with him. I'd go short term. Fleury, obviously leaving. I would love for him to come back in some kind of coaching aspect for the Wild, but uh, probably not. Maybe he goes back to Pittsburgh or just take some time off. That's very possible. And then Wallstedt, yeah. Um, I'm a huge Wallstedt fan, so you got to keep him around. Not expecting an 8-year deal there as well, but hey, Garen's done some things in the past with the long-term deals. Wallstedt, I would probably go 3 years, I think, 2 to 3 years in his first deal. Um, I'm hoping we do get to see some of Wallstedt in the net. I'm hoping that Philip Gustafson finds his way to a different team. I'm one of those that I would trade Gustafson if I was the general manager. But we'll talk about that a little bit more here and possible lineup. I do give the disclaimer on each show. I get a lot of shit in the comments for the possible lineup. This lineup is made off the depth chart for the team. So this is not necessarily my thoughts on what I want to see. I'll give you that here in a second. But don't kill the messenger. This is just a possible lineup. Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson, Ek, Matt Boldy. I like that top line. I would keep it as is. Johansson, Rossi, and Zuccarello. I would like to see Liam Ogren on that second line. Now, of course, it's going to depend on um, how it goes in the preseason for him. If he has a great preseason, I could see him possibly getting that look on the second line, but it's probably wishful thinking more than realistic. Um, I just don't really see Ogren fitting with Foligno and Kusadonov. I would think Trennan would fit much better in that line, so I'd much rather see Ogren on the second line. The fourth line, Goudreau, Trennan, and Hartman, that would not be a bad fourth line. I got to say, I don't think that's a bad fourth line at all in the NHL. Defenseman, Middleton has played his best when he's with Jared Spurgeon, so I would keep them as a pair. Brody and Faber, pretty easy decision there. Chisholm and Zach Bogosian on the third pair. John Merrill as an extra. And then goaltending again is pretty set, I think, with Gustafson and Fleury being the top two. As I said, I would move Gustafson out. And especially if the Wild are not in a playoff spot heading into the trade deadline, I would look at moving Gustafson at the deadline and then getting a much better look at Wallstedt for the remainder of the season. Seth, will go to you second this time. Possible lineup. What do you think here?
Well, I'll start in the goalie situation because I've kind of gone back and forth on this when it seemed like it was pretty likely that Bill Guerin was going to trade Philip Gustafson. There was a ton of steam there leading up to the draft, and then nothing materialized. Then free agency started, and some teams that needed goalies missed out on the key free agents. Then there were a bunch of trades. I think either Bill Guerin has just not seen the return that he's looking for Gustafson, or he's kind of had a change of heart. Because here's my thought process being, Marc-Andre Fleury is retiring once the season is done. Like, that's 100% set. It's going to happen. If you trade Philip Gustafson, then you go into next season with just having Jesper Wallstedt as that's the only goalie that you have on the NHL roster. And I don't have really any doubt that Jesper will be the guy going forward, but I do have concerns about just throwing him to the Wolves to start his career without a viable backup. Or at least somebody who can take, because I don't think you're likely to get through this season with Jesper and Fleury and say, all right, 82 starts, let's divide them in half and see how we get to the end of the season. So if it were me, I would rather keep Gustafson so that he can be, then there's no question with Jesper next year. You've got Gus as the top guy, and Jesper will get a ton of starts, but he also gets the opportunity to where you don't have to just like lean him into the ground early on in his career. So that's kind of where my mindset has gone on the goalie situation, is that I think it's more valuable for the Wild to keep Gus going into next season for just to help Jesper through his first full season at the NHL level, as opposed to trying to get him some mentor time with Fleury this season. Like, if you really want that, bring Fleury back as like an assistant goalie coach next year. Just have him travel with the team in a coach capacity. There are ways to do that. It's just, I don't think Jesper's going to make 50 starts next season, no matter what the scenario is. So that's kind of where I'm at with the goalie situation. Defensively, I like this look. I think this is what we'll see for the start of the season. You know, Middleton and Spurgeon, as you mentioned, when they were put together for the first time, they were one of the best defensive pairings in the NHL. So I think we're going to see that for sure. Brodin and Faber is really solid. Chisholm and Bogosian weren't bad down the stretch. That's I think your third pairing. You feel infinitely better about that than you do Goligoski and Merrill. And the forward groupings are interesting because it all comes down to whether or not lines 2, 3, and 4 can contribute on a regular basis. If they can, then you can go Kaprizov, Eriksson, Ek, and Boldy, which is like, they were statistically one of the best lines in the NHL last season once they got put together. But if that second line can't consistently score, then they're going to have to break that grouping up, and that's where you likely see Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello, and probably Eriksson, Ek, Boldy, and either Johansson or somebody else, Ogren maybe. So it all depends on how that second line does, but I do think that they'll start with Kaprizov, Eriksson, Ek, and Boldy to start the season because of how good they were last year. On the third line, I really have come around to liking Marcus Foligno, Murat Huznadinov, and Ryan Hartman. Like, I think that has potential to be a really scrappy physical line. And then Hartman can give you the goal scoring with that combo, which would then lead either Liam Ogren or Marcus Johansson on the fourth line with Freddie Gaudreau and Yakov Trenin. Give me Johansson on that fourth line. I don't know. I don't know what to do with him at this point. I would just much rather he be the press box guy and put Lauko in the fourth line role, but we'll just have to see how that plays out in training camp.
Awesome. Brett, what do you think here? Possible lineup. What changes would you make if you were head coach?
Yeah, I think the one area where, barring, as long as they're healthy, I don't think the defense pairs will change at all. If those 6 guys are healthy, that is what the pairings will be. You mentioned Jake Middleton played his best, I would argue, alongside Spurgeon, which, yes, that's true, but that was like, I would even argue it's even a step down. That he played as his most usable next to Spurgeon. Like, when he's not next to Spurgeon, he is genuinely awful, like horrendously bad away from Spurgeon. And I think, one, that's a testament to Spurgeon and how good and sound he is and underrated. But I'm not going to rant too much, but I still don't understand the extension to him. But that's a different story. Goalies, I'm with Seth. I don't think you can have, Fleury and or Wallstedt play 40 plus games this season. I don't think that's a fair load to throw on a team that has playoff aspirations. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of a 3-man rotation to start the year until one of those 3 begins to establish themselves. And I think the best case for the Wild might be if Gustafsson turns into that guy, because then, maybe now that trade value is up again, because I think what we saw from him years ago probably his ceiling, and I think what we saw last year is his floor. I think the Philip Gustafsson that, who is he really? I think it's somewhere in the middle, which is probably a league average goaltender, like someone in the probably like the 13 to 20 range in terms of where they rank in the league. And I think Seth's point about, what do you do next year if Fleury retires and get rid of Gustafsson? Like, the free agent market for goaltenders doesn't really like scream another goalie that you want to split time with. Cal Peterson, Ville Husso, Jake Allen, Freddie Anderson, Anton Forsberg, Karel Vejmelka, Mackenzie Blackwood, Jack Campbell, Charlie Lindgren. Like, I don't know if there's really a name in there. Like, that's just some of the ones that they'd probably actually be able to afford. I don't know if I want either of those guys playing 40 games either, however many. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of how that plays out. I wouldn't be surprised if they just hold on to Gustafsson, because I think a Gustafsson-Wallstedt tandem from here on out looks fine. I was a little confused by the Fleury extension, to be honest. It didn't make sense to me. And I think like that's one thing that never gets talked about, is that if Fleury's not here, like a Gustafsson-Wallstedt, people are like, oh yeah, that makes tons of sense. We're not even having this conversation. So, but I get the want to bring Fleury back, just the personality, the character. He's a guy you want in the locker room, and again, in that kind of mentorship role. So that'll be interesting. The forwards are where I'm still having a lot of trouble. I will be probably next week. I'm working on an article that's going to take a look at this from an analytics perspective, and kind of see like which players perform the best. Obviously, it's going to be with whoever else. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit tricky because Ogren's sample is very small. Murat Huzdinov's sample is very small. We don't have any like combinations to plug in Trenin or Lauko. What I do know those results will give me no matter what is like what Seth said, is that Kaprizov, Eriksson, Boldy line is arguably a top 3 line in the NHL when they're together. But what the numbers will also tell you is that Matt Zuccarello is a ghost when Kirill Kaprizov isn't on the other wing from him. So I think I disagree in the fact that I think to start the year, I don't think we'll see the Kaprizov Boldy line. I would not be surprised if we see if it's Kaprizov with Hartman and Zuccarello as a line, and then I think Eriksson, Boldy, and probably Ogren will be your second line. And then I think Rossi, Foligno, and then I would assume probably Trenin is probably your third line. And then your fourth line is some combo of Huznadinov, Goudreau, Johansson, and Lauko. That's kind of what my gut says, how things will start. But I think these are going to be lines that are going to be very fluid. I think you have kind of 4 guys in Kaprizov, Boldy, and Rossi that are pretty much guaranteed to be in your top 6. And the rest is a battle for who's ever playing the best at that time. It could move up. It could move down. I know third line Rossi is going to make a lot of people really upset. But I'll get into this more when I do my article in a couple of weeks. But from what I remember, Rossi and Foligno actually have some very, very good shutdown numbers together. And, you talk about secondary scoring. I think the flip side of that coin is if you can have a line that can shut down a top scoring line, like that line potentially could, especially with the addition of Trenin to that trio. I think now you have an opportunity to take some pressure off your top 6. And maybe that's where some of that secondary scoring comes from, is now you're getting that second line out there, maybe out against their second line or their third line or their fourth line, because you have the shutdown line that can kind of take some of that pressure off, kind of, akin to the old Grief squad. So, and if that's where Rossi's going to be penciled in potentially in your lineup for the years to come, it's maybe not a bad thing to get him used to kind of what that role looks like and see if it will work for him. So that's kind of what my gut leans. I'll have some more numbers hopefully to back up my claims in, late next week or the week after that. But that's kind of how I lean.
Well, and we've seen from John Hines since he took over too, is he has a very good, it seems like he has a really good pulse for how the team's doing during the game, and is very prone to, okay, Kirill is really buzzing tonight. Here are a couple of other guys that also are. Let's give them a look and see how that goes. So as much as we have, the starting lines for the game, Hines does a good job of mixing depending on how the actual game itself is going.
And I could even see too, like maybe if they're playing against, the Avalanche or the Stars, maybe they do load up that first line, like, hey, let's get the best line and try to get a couple goals. And maybe when they're playing a team, like San Jose or Anaheim or someone that's maybe not as strong, maybe that's when they try to balance out the lines more, roll guys a little bit more, where they're kind of adjusting the lineup more based on matchup, even more so than performance. Like I would not be surprised at all if that's something that we see pretty often versus like a static 4 lines that they try to get working all year.
I will say, if it's Kaprizov, Hartman, and Zuccarello, the Wild fan base is going to go nuts. I think.
Yeah, until they start scoring a bunch and we get secondary scoring, then they won't say anything. But I think we'll see a lot of things tried early in the season. A lot.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good way to do it. Is to move lines around, guys who are playing well. Really, there shouldn't be anything set in stone except the defenseman, just because of where it's at. But we'll move on along to the next segment, team future bets. So here we look at future bets for the Wild. Seth, I'll let you go first with this one. Does anything stand out on this page for you? Hopefully, you don't think the Wild are going to finish with the least points in the NHL. While there is a ton of value there, I don't think Wild fans would be happy to hear that as a play. But what do you think here? Anything catch your eye? How many points do you think the Wild will finish with this year? They had 87 last year, or 88. What do you think will happen this season?
So if I'm looking at bets here, the two that I'm probably going with for this upcoming season, I'm probably no on making the playoffs just because Colorado, Dallas, Nashville, and Winnipeg, I feel like are a step up above where the Minnesota Wild are at. And then you look in the Pacific Division, you've got Vancouver, you've got Edmonton, you've got Vegas, and you've got probably the Los Angeles Kings. Now, I would say the teams that are above the Wild in the Pacific are Vancouver and probably Edmonton. That's 6 teams that are above you right now. And then you're going to be fighting it out with St. Louis, with the Los Angeles Kings. Seattle Kraken are going to try to make the playoffs this season. Time will tell if they can actually do that. So it's just that there just are going to be a lot of teams in the fight this season. And until I see the Minnesota Wild actually beat the teams in the Central that are above them, like that was one of the biggest problems about last year was they did not beat any of the teams that were above them in the standings. They beat Nashville once and that was it. They didn't beat Colorado or Winnipeg or Dallas at any point during the season. So I'm going to take no for making the playoffs, but I think if the Wild avoid the injury bug this year, I mean, their defense should be better. They've got some young players that can help out on offense. And if the goaltending and the special teams bump up even a little bit, I think plus 90 points is probably a safe bet too. So those would be the two that I would take, would be no on the playoffs, but 90 plus points. I think those would be the most likely, at least from my perspective, for bets this season.
Okay. For me here, no plays on Stanley Cup, Conference, President's Trophy, Win Division. As much as I would like to see the Wild in the race for any of those, never President's Trophy. I do not want the Wild to win the President's Trophy. President's Trophy curse is real, and I never want to see them win the President's Trophy. That's one trophy I do not want them to win. But otherwise, this isn't a trophy year. This is a retooling year again. The Zach Parise, Ryan Suter buyouts are still here. I just, like you said, Seth, Nashville, Colorado, Dallas, all for sure better than the Wild. Winnipeg, I'm very unsure about Winnipeg. I think if they get a step back in goaltending, that they could take a giant step back as well. But make the playoffs. How the Wild are favored to make the playoffs is kind of shocking to me. Now, the main thing we're looking at here is the Wild didn't have Spurgeon last year. And assuming he's healthy for the full year this year, that's a big addition. Your top D man, your captain. So the Wild could be better this year, but a lot of the teams in the Central improved. So for me, as much as I hate to say it, I would be looking at no to make the playoffs, and I think under 93.5 points, 87 last year. I don't know if they improved that much. There's other teams in the Central like Utah. Watch out for Utah this year. I think they're going to be a pretty good team. So, fortunately, I would have to go with some negative future bets with the Wild this year. Brett, what do you think here? Future bets for the Wild?
I think I'm almost in the exact opposite boat of you. I think a lot of teams, pundits are going to underestimate the Wild. Again, we kind of talked about, I think, off the hop or before we jumped on, like there's some big ifs, but I mean, since John Hines took over, they run a 96-point pace. And like you said, that was without Spurgeon. That was with, I think, the 29th or 30th worst penalty kill, the 20, I think, like fourth worst save percentage. Like if either of those things start to regress back toward the mean and be just kind of league average, like they were a 96-point team with those things. Like I don't think if they're healthy and the penalty kill gets even like 3% better, if the save percentage goes up 3-4%, which aren't like huge jumps by any means, like this is a team that I think is a playoff team. I think easily hits 90 points. I think should hit 93.5 and could push for 100. I think it's like a pretty clear Dallas and Colorado atop this division. But I think there's a huge, like, it's going to be very competitive between Minnesota, Nashville, Winnipeg. I'm going to throw Utah in there because they made some really good updates this season to their team, I think, on the blue line. So they're a team I think could be in the mix. Like Chicago is really the only one still that's kind of on the outside looking in. And I think St. Louis is kind of like in this little bit of a retool too, where I don't think they're going to necessarily be a pushover, but they're probably the bottom two in the division. So it's going to be a very competitive division. You know, as Seth said, they have to beat the good teams. They, didn't beat a single team in front of them in the division last year, a single time. So you have to win those games. But again, I think we underestimate how much the impact of, having 7 players out at times affected this team. And I think, I don't think people realize how actually well they played under John Hines, despite, all the injuries and things that they went through. So they added players to hopefully, like in a Trenton, I think, that sounds like they're going to try Boldy on the kill. Like they're trying changes. They've brought in, a new coach to help with that. Like they're looking to make changes to those weak spots. And I think like they don't even have to be the league best. I think if those things get to league average, this is a way better team, I think, than people are anticipating.
Yeah, that's the thing is we don't need the Wild to jump, penalty kill wise into the top 5.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be 90% or 85. Like it's got to be.
Don't be abysmally bad.
Hey, I hope you're right, Brett. I hope you're right. I hope I'm wrong. I would love to see the Wild have a good season. So yeah. We'll see how they finish.
Like I think if there's one I'd have to place like on that list, it would be they'll hit the over on 93.5. Like that would be the one I feel the most confident in.
Awesome. And last segment is looking at player future bets. So this is point total, goal totals. The Wild are one of the few teams that have both goaltenders listed for when it comes to wins. Gustafson at a low number at 24.5, Fleury at 16.5. And then we have some award winning future bets there at the bottom. I'll start here for this one. Looking at Kaprizov, 46 goals last year, so he's at 46.5 here. This year, 96 points last year in 75 games played. It's not that I don't think he can hit those, because he's been a 40-goal scorer in the last 3 seasons. So I do see him hitting 40. 46.5 is just a little bit of a high number overall for me. Boldy at 32.5. If he's not going to be on the top line, if he is going to be on that second line, then I really don't want to go anywhere near Boldy props. I would want him on that top line. 29 goals last year, 69 points, 75 games. So Boldy props don't interest me. Now, Eriksson Ek, 27 and a half here.
That is the easiest over I've ever seen in my life.
Yes, that's one that I like here.
I would honestly, not kidding, if I would almost consider putting every amount of money I have in my bank account on that bet, because Joel Eriksson Ek had 39 expected goals last year, was under that finishing total, and still had more than 27 and a half. That guy is going to score, if they do the Boldy, Kaprizov, Ek line all year, he might score 50.
Wow. And yeah, Eriksson Ek is the perfect example. I think, Seth, that you mentioned earlier about players not necessarily coming right out of the gate and being the top players. Sometimes they need some years. And we've seen Eriksson Ek's offense expand over the last few years, getting 30 goals last year, 34 assists, 64 points. So his point total is not available, his point prop, but his goal prop is. And like Brett said, that's one of the plays I like. Eriksson Ek over 27 and a half goals. Faber is at 53 and a half points. He had 47 last year in 82 games. I think he's going to have a better season than the 47. I would go with Faber over 53 and a half. The reason being, I think a lot of pressure was thrown on Faber last year with Spurgeon being out, that Faber had to be that number one D-man. He had the extra minutes thrown on him, but also the defensive pressure that he had to really produce. I think having him on the second T pair with Spurgeon back, I think that gives Faber a little, and playing with Brodin as well, a very defensive player. I think that allows Faber to play more offensively. So I would like Faber over 53 and a half points. The Gus and Flower win totals are Gus had 20 last year. Fleury had 17 last year. So it's very tough for me to choose. If Gustafsson was to get traded, that could definitely affect his win total. I don't see them trading Fleury. I did read somewhere that Bill Guerin said that Fleury playing 40 games is definitely not out of the question. So
GM speak.
I'm not pulling the trigger on either of those. The Wild's tough when it comes to the goalie wins.
Those are good
category.
lines.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the bottom three futures, Wallstedt Calder, he's not going to play enough unless there is a Gustafsson trade or a Fleury trade. Wallstedt's just not going to play enough to win the Calder, so I wouldn't look at that.
And
Faber Norris
historically have struggled to win that award, even when they have been good.
Exactly. Faber Norris, I believe he's going to win one. He is going to win a Norris Trophy in his career. I don't know when it's going to be. So plus 7,500 is definitely something very appealing. But he has to beat Makar. He has to beat Heiskanen. He has to beat Adam Fox. There's a lot of really good D-men there. So not something I'm going to play preseason. But depending on how Faber plays offensively, I may look at that. And then Kaprizov, Rocket, Richard plus 1,200. I would love to see that cash, but I don't think, especially if he is going to be playing with Hartman and Zuccarello at times, even with Boldy and Ek, I don't know that Kaprizov could win the Rocket Richard trophy. So we'll see what happens. Brett, we'll go to you second this time. Player future bets. What do you think here?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm definitely taking the over on that Eriksson Ek one. 30 goals in 77 games last year, and that was while being 22nd in the league in shots on goal, fifth in individual expected goals, and fifth in individual high danger chances. This is a guy that's always around the net. He scores lots of goals. I think he's gonna be on power play 1. That's where he's gonna get. He'll probably he might get 20 from the power play alone if that improves. So that one's easy over for me. Kaprizov, I think I take the over on both of those. Like, this is a guy who should be in the prime of his career, and if he doesn't do it now, he's probably never doing it ever. This is a guy that should at some point in his career hit the 50 goal mark. And I think, depending on how they roll out lines this year, this would not be a surprising year for me to do it. The points, I think, are fair to be written. That's a really good line, 99. I think I still lean the over because I am a little bit more bullish probably on the Wild. Maybe it's the homer in me, but then maybe others are. Boldy, I'm taking the over on both of those. I don't think people. I had a tweet a couple weeks ago about like how sneaky good Boldy is, and no one really realizes it. Like, the company that he's in with his point production at his age is like the guys that are in the conversation with him are like all stars, like superstars. Like, he is that good. Like, his production is already on pace to be like higher of that of Kaprizov in the NHL at the same age. Like, I don't know if enough people like realize like how impactful he is. So like 72.5, I think would be a step backwards for him. And the way he's played and continues to play, I don't see him taking a step backward. I think that's continuing to go forward. Faber at 53.5 is one I'm struggling with a little bit because 16 of his points last year came on the power play. And I was playing in power play 1. And I don't think that is a spot that he's going to be in this year unless something happens to Declan Chisholm. From what I've heard, I think it will be Chisholm on that first power play unit, which I think, you're looking at a hit to potentially 16, maybe not the full 16, but the Wild's second power play unit historically is not a unit that sees a lot of ice time. And when they do, they don't typically score because the first unit is usually out there for like a minute and a half, minute 45 seconds. So if he's not on that first power play, I have a hard time seeing him hitting even his point total from last year. I think a consistent 40-point player is easily in the realm for him, but 53 is pretty bullish. I think that's a number like Wild defensemen historically have hit like maybe once. I think Suter did it once. I don't know if there's ever been another higher than that. So that's the kind of company and season we need to see out of him. And I just think with the return of Spurgeon, he could be a guy that's on power play 2 as well. I don't know if they do both, Faber and Spurgeon, like does Faber come off completely? I don't know. So that's the only reason that's giving me pause there. Like that'd be a ton of even, like if he does get that without playing on power play 1, then he might actually end up in the Norris conversation. Because he's probably doing some extraordinary things at 5-on-5. The goalie ones are so hard. It's so hard to predict those without knowing what the distribution of games is going to be. And Rocket Richard, I'd love to see it, but I don't know that I could put money on it when guys like McDavid, Draisaitl, Pasternak, and Matthews all continue to exist. So.
I completely agree. But hey, maybe he'll surprise us. Seth, what do you think here? Player future bets.
Let's start with Kirill Kaprizov because I'm smashing the over on both. From the moment that John Hines took over to the end of the season, Kirill Kaprizov was 7th in the NHL in points. He had 78 points in the final 56 games of the season, including 40 goals. If you spread that out to an 82-game season, that's a 114-point pace. And so, a couple of factors here. If he plays a majority of the time with either Matt Zuccarello kind of getting back on track or Boldy and Eriksson Ek, I don't see any reason why he can't hit 99.5 points.
And I think the benefit of having Kaprizov in the situation is that they will make lineup adjustments around him.
Yes.
Like if he's not going, they will tweak the lines to get him going. He won't be like a Boldy where it might depend on what's happening because they're not necessarily going to build or adjust lineup around Boldy getting going. They might, but like Kaprizov, they will adjust. So if he's not scoring a Zuccarello, they'll put him back with Boldy. They'll put him back with Ek. That's almost a guarantee, I think.
Kaprizov's also coming into the season healthy, and he was not healthy going into last season, so it took him about 20 games. It took him about 20 games to get going, and so he's going to have the full season. He's still the number one option on offense, on the power play, in overtime, in even strength. He's still the number one dog in all of those different scenarios. So I'm taking the over on both because I think I think he's just going to be consistently put with, like Brett said, just whoever is playing the best, like as opposed to what Dean used to do, where it's you're with these guys and you guys just kind of have to figure it out.
And it's not like technically a contract year, but it kind of is for him as well. Like
it's a show me year.
Yeah, like he's playing for, okay, if I do this year, this is how much you're paying me, or I'm going to free agency. Like I think like that stuff, as much as we joke about it not mattering and the players not thinking about it, they're definitely like it's in the back of their mind for sure.
So I'm taking the Kaprizov. I'm taking both of those overs. Honestly, I just did an episode yesterday. I think Matt Boldy is in store for a monster season because I think, like, you look at the numbers, as Brett alluded to, the amount of high danger chances that were created by that Kaprizov, Boldy, Eriksson Ek combo was it was insane. I think they were plus 46 over their opponents, and they outscored them in high danger chances 15-4. And that was just in the time that they came together from the end of the season.
4.97 goals per 60 and 3.55 expected goals per 60.
Just
like
gross.
Absurd numbers.
Just insane. But the other part of this too that I think is an important one to keep in mind is just how much the Wild rely on their top power play unit. And Matt Boldy is starting to become more of a primary assist guy on that unit. Like he had, I think the number was 25 primary assists this season, which means that he's starting to set guys up more regularly, which is going to increase his point total. And he's slowly becoming the number 2 option on this team, which has the benefits that he's going to be in positions with Kirill Kaprizov more often. Maybe not to start the game, but if John Hines needs a line to go get them a goal in a key situation, Matt Boldy's going to be part of that. And so I think...
I don't remember if Hines did it too, but like I know Dean, like following a penalty kill, right? It was Boldy, Kaprizov, and like Ek or whoever else, or Hartman over the boards for that next shift. Like there are like... And those, like, it seems like they were always getting chances, like when they did actually kill off the penalty, the 1 out of 5 times that actually happened, the chances after that were always pretty good too. So yeah, I think little situations like that's a great call out.
And the part too, if he can increase his accuracy in some of those in close one-timers, like how many times did we see, whether it be Boldy or somebody else, just whiff or completely miss on a one-timer? If you can increase the percentage in those shots by even a little bit, that's a huge bump in goals. And so I'm taking Boldy in both. Joel Eriksson Ek, 27.5 goals, easy, because he's the net front guy, number 1 center, number 1 power play. He's just in all of the top offensive situations on this team. And so when rebound opportunities exist, he cleans up on them. Beyond that, I agree with not really being sure on the Faber points. I'd probably lean under there just because Spurgeon being back is going to eat into some of those opportunities for sure. I really want to take the over on Gustafsson wins because I want to believe that he's going to take back the net this season after what happened last year, but I can't really commit to that. I don't want anything to do with the Fleury 16.5 because I don't see it at 39. And if I could put any money on the bottom 3, it would be on Kaprizov to win the Rocket. But he's going to have to, for him to win it, he's probably going to have to get to about 60 or 65 goals and probably north of 130 points to do it. And I think even if he would put up a number like that, he still has to go up against all the guys that are just in the conversation every single season. So it just, as much as I want to, it's just not likely to happen.
I completely agree. We all like Eriksson Ek goals over. So that's the consensus here, is that we all like Eriksson Ek.
If he plays over like 82 games, that's the easiest money I think you will ever make in your life.
Yeah.
Like if we had that option, if we had the opportunity to sports bet in Minnesota, I would go do that right now, but we don't have that. So,
oh no, wow, that's something Minnesota has to change.
We're working on it.
And that's the show. Do you guys have any finishing thoughts before we finish the show here?
Nothing crazy. Just thanks for having us on. Always good to talk Wild, and I've never talked about it necessarily from the lens of betting, so it's kind of a fun, different way to think about and kind of drive the conversation. So it was cool, different experience. Enjoyed being on.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens as the year progresses, because we've got these guys that have been talked about quite regularly: Liam Ogren, Murat Huznadinov. You can throw even Riley Height and Zeev Boyum into the conversation too, as to if this current group of players on the roster start to really, like, if some of the guys on the roster start to really struggle, there are less and less ways to defend keeping them on the roster. And so at some point during this year or leading into next year, I think we're going to see more and more of these prospects that are going to lead to more excitement for this team as we tread into the final year of Kirill Kaprizov's current contract and hope that he signs a new one.
Awesome. I'll finish off by saying the future is bright for the Minnesota Wild. A lot of good young talent coming. The future is very bright. Make sure to give Seth and Brett a follow. Both their Twitter links are here on the page and in the description below. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next show.